My mother humiliated me in front of 300 donors because I asked where the money went. 6 weeks later, I answered that question in front of the IRS, the board, and every woman she used to build her halo. That night, though, I was just standing near table 12 in a black dress I had bought myself, holding untouched champagne while strangers smiled at my mother like she had personally invented mercy. The Harbor Light Initiative's annual gala was being held in the ballroom of the Lydian Grand Hotel, one of those downtown buildings with marble columns, gold mirrors, and chandeliers that made everyone underneath them look richer and kinder than they probably were. White orchids filled every table. A string quartet played near the silent auction. On one wall, framed portraits of women looked out over the room, each photograph lit like a shrine. Under every portrait was a brass plaque, a new beginning, a safe place, a life rebuilt. Donors moved with champagne flutes and sympathetic faces. Reporters were there, cameras were there. And near the stage stood my sister, Iris, who looked like she belonged in every frame. Iris wore a pale blue silk gown that made her eyes look wet even when she laughed. At 32, she was the public face of Harbor Light, the daughter who cried during speeches, hugged survivors on camera, and made donors feel holy. I was there because not inviting me would have raised questions. That was how my family handled me. I was not included because I was loved. I was included because my absence was harder to explain than my presence. Before the program began, my mother took both my hands near the entrance, smiling in case anyone was watching. Serafina Monroe was 61, polished, silver-haired, and always aware of the nearest camera. "Tess," she said warmly, squeezing my fingers hard enough to hurt. "Tonight is important." "I know." "No, sweetheart. You know facts. I'm talking about importance." There it was. The little needle slipped under the skin with a smile. She looked toward the ballroom. "Tonight is about hope. Please don't audit the centerpieces." "I'm not here to make a scene." Her smile stayed in place. "Good, because scenes are expensive." My father joined us a second later. Calvin Monroe, attorney, strategist, and lifelong translator of my mother's wishes into legal language. He kissed my cheek without touching my face and said, "Tess, you look professional." From Calvin, that was not a compliment. Professional meant severe. Severe meant cold. Cold meant difficult. Behind him, Iris swept toward us with her husband, Dane Whitaker, following half a step behind. Dane was Harbor Light's CFO, though I had never understood whether he had the job because he knew finance or because marrying Iris required a title. "Tess," Iris said, wrapping her arms around me with careful affection. "I'm so glad you came." "You invited me." "I know, but sometimes you get uncomfortable at emotional events." "What makes me uncomfortable is inaccurate reporting." Dane's smile twitched. Iris gave me the look she used when cameras were near, the wounded look of a woman forgiving someone who had not apologized. "Tonight isn't about reports. It's about the women." "The reports are supposed to be about the women." My father's hand landed on my elbow. "Let's save shop talk for another day." I looked at Dane. "Are the updated housing figures available yet?" He blinked too quickly. "We're still finalizing impact language." "Numbers," I said. "Not language." My mother touched my arm with 2 fingers as if touching too much of me might leave a stain. "Smile, sweetheart. The press is here." So I smiled. That was the photo they used later. My mother radiant, my sister glowing, my father dignified, Dane grateful, and me standing just far enough away to look like I had already been edited out. At each place setting was a glossy program printed on heavy cream paper. On the cover was a portrait of a woman named Maribel Cruz. I did not know her then. I only knew her face from campaigns, bus shelter ads, donor packets, and my mother's speeches. Inside the program, the headline read, 1,200 women safely housed and supported this year. I stared at the number until the rest of the page blurred. 1,200. 3 months earlier, during a private family board prep meeting, I had asked how Harbor Light was defining housed. Dane had said, "We use a broad service model." I had asked, "Does a grocery card count as housing support?" Iris had snapped, "Why are you trying to make this ugly?" My mother had sighed like I had broken something delicate. Because Tess sees numbers before she sees people. I had not meant to sound cruel that day. I had meant to sound precise. Restricted housing donations had rules. Grant reports had rules. If the foundation told donors their money housed women, then the money needed to house women. Not build a brand, not fund a ballroom, not dress my sister for morning television. But in my family, rules were what Calvin used against other people. The program began after dessert. The chandeliers dimmed. The screens beside the stage lit up with the Harbor Light logo, a gold lantern inside a circle of white waves. My mother walked to the podium, and the room rose before she said a word. That was the power she had. She could make 300 people stand for the idea of her. She began with the story she had told 100 times. A woman sleeping with 2 children near the harbor. A promise to God. A light for women left in darkness. Harbor Light, she said, was not charity, but family. People dabbed at their eyes. Then she turned toward Iris. "My daughter Iris," she said, her voice thickening beautifully, "has always understood the heart of this work. She sees people, not problems, stories, not statistics, souls, not spreadsheets." The applause started before my mother finished. Iris pressed a napkin under one eye. Cameras turned toward her. Then my mother's gaze shifted. I knew before she said my name. "And my Tess," she said, smiling gently. "My brilliant, complicated Tess. She has a different gift." My stomach tightened. "She sees numbers." A few people chuckled. My mother lifted a hand as if defending me from an attack she had created. "Numbers matter. Of course they do. We need structure. We need compliance. We need people willing to sit with forms while the rest of us sit with broken hearts." More laughter, warmer now. "But tonight," my mother continued, "is not about suspicion. It is not about cynicism. It is not about allowing fear to make us forget compassion. Tonight is about the women who need us to lead with love." The room applauded again. And this time, they were not applauding me. They were applauding the idea that someone like me had been put in my place. Iris walked onto the stage and hugged our mother, both of them framed perfectly between the screens. When Iris stepped to the podium, her voice trembled. "Harbor Light saved me too. Not from homelessness or violence, obviously, but from becoming numb. This work taught me that when a woman tells you she is hurting, you don't ask her to prove it with paperwork." The room murmured approval. I felt something cold move through me. Iris looked toward my table, not at the room, at me. "We prepared a short video tonight," she said, "because sometimes people outside this mission misunderstand what compassion looks like. Sometimes even people close to us forget that behind every line item is a life." The screens went black. Then my face appeared. It was from the private meeting 3 months earlier. I recognized the conference room, the gray wall, my hair pulled back too tightly. The clip began with my voice. "I need documented names, dates, and lease payments. I am not accepting stories as proof." A gasp moved through the ballroom. The video cut. My voice again. "A gift card is not housing. A photo shoot is not a program outcome. If we can't verify these women, we can't keep claiming them." Another cut. Then Iris's voice trembling. "Why are you talking about them like they're fake?" My answer came fast, stripped of everything before and after it. Because some of them are. The ballroom went silent. Heat climbed up my neck, not because I was ashamed of the question, because I understood the edit. I remembered the missing pieces. I had been talking about records, duplicated entries, dead phone numbers, names appearing 3 times under different services. They made it look like I was talking about women. On screen, my mother appeared, one hand pressed to her chest. "Tess, please, these are survivors." My face again, colder than I remembered. "Then prove it." The clip ended. For one breath, nobody moved. Then Iris turned back to the microphone, eyes shining. I debated whether to show that. Truly, because family is sacred to me, but this work is sacred too. We have to be honest about the kind of world we are fighting, a world that demands wounded women produce receipts before they are believed. Applause began slowly, then spread. My mother lowered her head like a martyr. My father stared straight ahead. Dane would not look at me. I stood, not dramatically. I did not shout that the video was edited. I simply stood because if I stayed seated, I would become part of their staging. The donor's wife beside me whispered, "Maybe this isn't the time." I looked at her. That was the point. As I walked toward the exit, I could feel every eye turning me into exactly what my mother needed me to be: the jealous daughter, the numbers woman, the cold auditor. "Tess," my father said behind me. I kept walking. "Tess." His voice did not rise, but something in it stopped me near the coat check. I turned. Calvin Monroe stood beneath a spray of white orchids, his tuxedo perfect, his expression almost kind. "You should think carefully before you make this worse." I didn't show that video. "No," he said, "but you gave them the footage." It was a private meeting. Private meetings are still made of words. You chose yours poorly. They edited out the context. The public rarely has patience for context. Through the open ballroom doors, I heard Iris speaking again. Her voice broke in all the right places. My father stepped closer. "Apologize tonight. Tell your mother you were overwhelmed. Say your compliance background made you insensitive to survivor-centered language." No. His face hardened by only a fraction, but I had grown up reading fractions. "Your mother has built something extraordinary. Do not confuse your personal resentment with moral insight." My personal resentment didn't create missing housing documentation. You don't know what you think you know. That's an interesting sentence from an attorney. He smiled without warmth. And that is the tone that makes people doubt your heart. For a second, some small, stupid part of me still wanted my father to understand me, even after decades of proof that understanding was not the service he offered. Instead, I said, "Tell Dane to preserve records." His eyes sharpened. There it was. The first real thing that had happened all night. Not the speech, not the video, not the applause. That tiny flicker of alarm in my father's face. Then he recovered. "Go home, Tess." So I did. Outside, the night air hit me hard. Behind the ballroom windows, harbor light glowed gold against the dark, beautiful and expensive and false. My phone buzzed 3 times before I reached the curb. A text from Iris. "I'm sorry you felt attacked. I hope someday you let love soften you." A text from my mother. "You embarrassed yourself. I will pray you find humility." A text from Dane. "Please don't contact staff about records without going through me." I stared at Dane's message longest, because that was not grief. That was not outrage. That was not family pain dressed up as concern. That was control. I got into the rideshare and gave my address. As the car pulled away from the Lydian Grand, I looked back at the ballroom windows. Inside, my mother was probably taking the stage again. Iris was probably crying, and donors were probably writing checks. I should have felt destroyed. I did feel humiliated. I felt the burn of being misrepresented by people who knew exactly where to cut because they had spent my whole life studying my weak places. I felt rage, yes, but underneath it was something steadier: recognition. The edited video was not just cruelty, it was evidence. They had not mocked me because I was wrong. They had mocked me because I had asked a question close enough to the truth to frighten them. If the numbers were clean, my mother would have handed me a binder and smiled for the cameras. If the beneficiary records matched the donor reports, Dane would not have told me to stay away from staff. If the women in those portraits had received everything Harbor Light claimed, Iris would not have needed to turn a compliance concern into a moral crime. My mother said I only saw numbers. She was right. That was why I could see what she had stolen. The ride home from the gala took 26 minutes, which was just enough time for me to watch my reputation get murdered in real time. By the time I unlocked my apartment door, my phone was already full of messages. Some were from cousins I had not heard from since Christmas. Some were from family friends who began with, "I love you, but," which always meant they did not love me enough to ask what had actually happened. One message came from a donor I had once helped during a grant reporting issue. She wrote, "Tess, I know compliance matters, but tonight felt cruel." Cruel. That was the word people always reached for when they did not like a woman asking for proof. I set my keys in the ceramic bowl by the door, kicked off my heels, and stood in the dark living room without turning on a light. Across the city, my mother's gala was probably still glowing. People were probably still drinking champagne beneath those chandeliers, still admiring the portraits, still congratulating themselves for believing the right woman. And I was back in my apartment, alone with the same label my family had pressed onto me since childhood: cold. The cold daughter, the difficult daughter, the daughter without a heart. I used to think they called me that because I did not cry easily. Later, I understood it was because I did not cry on command. Iris could. Iris had always been able to lower her chin, let her eyes fill, and make adults rush toward her with tissues and forgiveness. I did not hate her for that when we were children. In the beginning, I was fascinated by it. It seemed like magic, the way emotion could rearrange blame. When Iris was 8 and broke one of my mother's crystal candle holders, she cried so hard that my mother hugged her and told her accidents had happened. When I was 11 and noticed that $200 from a church raffle envelope had been entered twice in the tally sheet, my mother did not hug me. She pulled me into the pantry and told me never to embarrass her in front of volunteers again. "You made everyone uncomfortable," she said. "I just said the total was wrong. And you said it like being right mattered more than being kind." That was one of the first lessons my family taught me. Being right was only admirable when it protected their image. When truth disrupted the room, truth became rudeness. My earliest memories of Harbor Light were not of shelters or women or rescue vans. They were of hotel luncheons where my mother wore cream suits and told stories that made wealthy women press checks into donation baskets. Iris sang at those luncheons sometimes. She had a sweet little voice and a gift for looking innocent under stage lights. She would sing something hopeful, usually with a ribbon in her hair, and my mother would wipe her eyes in the front row, even though she had chosen the song herself. I sat in the back with donation envelopes. At 9 years old, I knew how to separate checks from cash, how to write donor names legibly, how to keep the raffle tickets in numerical order. Adults praised Iris for having such a tender spirit. They praised me for being so organized, which was what people said to little girls when they appreciated their labor, but not their presence. After every event, my mother would kiss Iris on the forehead and say, "You moved them, baby." Then she would glance at my tally sheets and say, "Did you double check?" I always did. That was the strange thing. My mother trusted my numbers. She relied on them. She just did not want anyone to admire me for them. My father was worse because he made it sound intellectual. Calvin Monroe believed reputation was not vanity, but infrastructure. He said it at dinner, in the car, on the way to church, after donor meetings, before board retreats. People do not give money to need, he would say. They give money to trust, protect the trust, and you protect the mission. For years, I thought that meant honesty mattered. I thought trust was something you built by telling the truth carefully. Then I grew older and realized my father meant something else. To him, trust was public perception. If the public believed you were good, then goodness had already been achieved. When I was 14, I found a donation check tucked inside an old program folder after a spring fundraiser, $5,000 from a local dentist's office. It had never been deposited. I brought it to my mother while she was in her office with 2 board members. "I found this in the blue folder," I said. "It's from March. It's not in the deposit log." My mother's smile froze. One of the board members said, "Oh dear, that could have been bad." I thought I had helped. After they left, my mother closed the office door and slapped the folder against her desk. "Do you enjoy making me look careless?" My face went hot. "No, I thought you needed it. I needed you to wait until we were alone." But the check was missing. And now, 2 board members know that. She said it as if the missing money was not the problem. The witnesses were. That night at dinner, my father explained it to me with surgical calm. "Tess, facts have timing. If you reveal them at the wrong moment, they become weapons." I wasn't trying to hurt anyone. Intentions do not matter when damage is done. I looked at Iris, hoping for support. She was 12, eating mashed potatoes in tiny bites. She did not look up. My mother forgave me after 3 silent days, but not before she told everyone I was going through a rigid phase. That phrase followed me for years. Rigid phase, compliance brain, little auditor, our family calculator. By high school, I had learned to measure the emotional temperature of every room before speaking. Not because I wanted approval, though I did, because I understood that my family could turn any practical question into a character flaw. If I asked whether the caterer invoice matched the event budget, I was joyless. If I asked whether restricted donations had been separated from general funds, I was suspicious. If I asked why a client transportation reimbursement looked like my mother's airport car service, I was ungrateful. Iris never asked those questions. Iris asked better ones, at least according to my mother. How did she feel? What does healing look like? How can we honor her story? Those were beautiful questions. They were not useless. I knew that. I still know that. But in our family, those questions were often used to float above the ground where receipts lived. Tears distracted from totals. Stories softened discrepancies. Compassion, spoken in my mother's voice, became a curtain. I became a nonprofit compliance auditor because I did not want to spend my life watching curtains fall over money that belonged to vulnerable people. People think charity fraud is always dramatic, like suitcases of cash or secret offshore accounts. Sometimes it is quieter. A donor gives $50,000 for emergency rent, and the organization uses it for a branding consultant. A grant promises counseling sessions, but the invoices show Wellness strategy development. A woman's photo appears in a report as proof of transformation, but no one can find her lease, her case notes, or her consent form. Fraud loves noble language. Restricted funds become flexible mission support. Luxury travel becomes donor cultivation. Public relations becomes awareness expansion. And anyone who asks for proof is accused of not understanding the heart of the work. I understood the heart of the work. That was why I cared where the blood was going. Harbor? Light had started small before I was born. My mother's version of the story was practically scripture in our house. She saw a woman outside a bus station with a swollen eye and a baby wrapped in a towel. She bought the woman a sandwich. The woman cried. My mother prayed. The Harbor Light Initiative was born. I never found the woman. I did not know her name. In every retelling, she had less identity and more symbolic power. Sometimes she had one child, sometimes two. Sometimes she was fleeing a violent husband. Sometimes she had aged out of foster care. The details changed depending on the donor audience. When I once asked my mother whether the woman had ever stayed in contact, she looked wounded. Must everything be verified to matter? No, I said carefully. But if she inspired the foundation, I thought maybe we knew what happened to her. My mother touched her necklace. She belongs to God now. I had no idea if that meant the woman was dead or simply inconvenient. By the time Harbor Light became famous, my mother had perfected the language of public virtue. The foundation claimed to provide emergency housing, legal advocacy, trauma therapy, job placement, transportation, childcare assistance, and long-term survivor support. Its brochures were beautiful. Its videos were heartbreaking. Its annual reports looked like hope printed on glossy paper. For a long time, I wanted to believe in it. That is the part people never understood. I did not grow up hoping my mother was a fraud. I grew up hoping she was exactly who strangers believed she was. I wanted the woman on stage to be real. I wanted the softness she gave donors, survivors, pastors, reporters, and IRS to eventually turn toward me. Every daughter has some foolish private bargain with her mother. Mine was this: if I became useful enough, precise enough, beyond criticism, then maybe she would stop calling my clarity cold. So, I became excellent. I studied accounting, nonprofit governance, grant compliance, restricted fund management, internal controls, audit trails. I learned how to read financial statements the way other people read confessions. I learned that money always tells a story, especially when someone tries to silence it. And the more I learned, the more Harbor Light bothered me. The first thing was the beneficiary counts. One annual report claimed Harbor Light had provided comprehensive support to 846 women in a year, when its staff size suggested that level of case management would have required a miracle or illegal overtime. When I asked Dane how many were active cases versus event contacts, he said, impact categories overlap. That was not an answer, it was fog. The next year, the number jumped to 1,050, then 1,200. My mother called it growth. I called it a denominator problem. At a family dinner, I asked whether the board had reviewed the methodology behind the figures. Iris set down her wine glass and said, "Do you hear yourself? Methodology? These are women, Tess. Then they deserve accurate reporting. They deserve belief. They deserve services that actually exist." My mother went quiet in the way that made everyone else go quiet too. Finally, she said, "There are many forms of rescue. Not in a restricted housing grant." Dane gave a nervous laugh. "We're aligned with donor intent." Which donor? Which intent? Which grant? My father folded his napkin. Enough. That single word ended the conversation, as it always had. Enough meant Tess had crossed from difficult into dangerous. After that, Dane stopped sending me financial summaries when I asked casual questions. Iris stopped mentioning harbor light work around me unless she was on camera. My mother began referring to me publicly as my daughter in compliance, a phrase that sounded respectable until you heard the warning underneath. Still, I did not investigate. Not then. That is important. I saw hints. I saw inflated language. I saw reports that made my professional instincts tense. But I also saw my mother's name on the building. I saw my sister's face on the website. I saw my father's legal signature on board resolutions. Family has a way of making evidence look like disloyalty before it looks like truth. So I told myself, maybe I was too harsh. Maybe I did not understand direct service work. Maybe Harbor Light's records were messy because the work was messy. Maybe my mother exaggerated because donors needed simple stories. Maybe Dane was overwhelmed. Maybe Iris believed what she said because believing it made her beautiful. Maybe, maybe. The maybes ended at the gala. Not because they insulted me. They had insulted me before. Not because they made me look heartless. They had been rehearsing that narrative my whole life. The maybes ended because they used an edited video to make sure no one asked the question I had asked. Where did the money go? That was the question under every speech, every orchid, every portrait, every tear sliding perfectly down Iris's cheek. That was the question my mother dressed in moral outrage and hid behind wounded women. That was the question my father warned me not to sharpen. Late that night, I sat at my kitchen table with my laptop open and the Gala program beside it. Maribel Cruz looked up from the cover with solemn eyes and a borrowed smile. Beneath her photo, the caption said, Harbor Light had given her 6 months of safe housing, counseling, legal support, and a fresh start. I traced the number 1,200 with my thumb. The world saw my mother as a saint. I had seen her receipts. At 2:17 in the morning, while the city outside my apartment looked clean and indifferent, an anonymous message appeared in my professional inbox. The subject line was blank. The sender's address was a string of letters and numbers from an encrypted service I did not recognize. At first, I thought it was spam. Then I opened it and saw one sentence. You were right. The shelter numbers are fake. I sat back so fast my chair scraped the kitchen floor. For a few seconds, I did nothing. I did not breathe properly. I did not touch the keyboard. I just stared at those 7 words and felt every insult from the gala rearrange itself into something colder than humiliation. Confirmation. There was no signature, no attachment, no proof. Just that sentence, sitting beneath the blank subject line, like a match struck in a dark room. I should have deleted it. That would have been the safe, legally cautious thing. Anonymous messages were unreliable. They were emotional. They were often bait. I knew that better than most people because compliance work teaches you 2 opposing truths at once. Rumors can destroy innocent people, and rumors are sometimes the only doorway into the truth. I created a new folder in my inbox called Harbor Light and moved the message there. Then I forwarded a copy to a secure external archive I used for work documentation, time-stamped it, and wrote a note to myself. 2:22 a.m. M. Anonymous message received after Gala. No response sent yet. Preserve original. My father had taught me that facts had timing. I had learned that evidence had custody. The next message arrived at 2:31. I can prove some of it, not all. Please don't tell Dane. That was when my pulse changed. Dane's name made the message real. Not reliable, not yet, but real enough to answer. I typed carefully. Who are you? Three dots appeared, vanished, appeared again. Someone who still works there. I looked toward the Gala program on my table. Maribel Cruz watched from the cover, her printed eyes steady and sad. I typed, "What do you have access to?" The reply came almost immediately. Beneficiary records. Intake spreadsheets. Deleted folders if IT hasn't wiped them yet. Vendor requests, I need to meet in person. A reasonable person would have called an attorney first. A calmer person would have waited until morning. But I had spent the last 5 hours being publicly branded as a woman who hated survivors because I wanted documentation that women had actually been helped. If someone inside Harbor Light was scared enough to contact me at 2 in the morning, waiting felt less like caution and more like surrender. Still, I was not reckless. No files over email, I wrote. No downloads from systems you are not authorized to access. Do not take anything that puts you in criminal exposure. Bring only what you have lawful access to in your role. We meet somewhere public. There was a pause. Then, Bluebell Diner, 7 a.m., back booth. My name is Nina. I knew the name. Nina Reyes. 26, foundation assistant, the person who did everything that did not fit neatly into anyone else's job description. I had seen her at board meetings carrying binders, fixing slides, whispering reminders to Dane, and standing near the wall with the exhausted posture of someone who was essential enough to exploit but not important enough to protect. At 6:48 that morning, I parked 2 blocks from the Bluebell Diner and watched the entrance before going inside. That sounds dramatic. It was not. It was habit. When powerful people start lying about you in public, you learn to notice who may be watching in private. The diner was narrow, chrome-edged, and almost empty, except for 2 nurses finishing breakfast and a man in a construction jacket reading sports news on his phone. Nina sat in the last booth with both hands around a coffee mug. She looked younger without the foundation's blazer. Her dark hair was pulled into a low ponytail, and there were purple shadows under her eyes. When she saw me, fear crossed her face so clearly that I almost turned around to spare her. I slid into the booth across from her. "You can leave right now," I said quietly. "No explanation, no guilt." Her fingers tightened around the mug. "If I leave, they'll keep doing it. Then before we talk, I need you to understand something. I am not your lawyer. I can't promise you protection I don't control. I can tell you how to preserve what you are allowed to preserve, and I can help get the right people involved, but I don't want you stealing files for me." Her eyes filled suddenly. That's the first thing anyone has said to me that wasn't about protecting them. I waited. She swallowed. "The number isn't 1200. I know it isn't." "No," she said. "I mean, it really isn't, not even close." She opened a canvas tote bag and pulled out a spiral notebook, not a flash drive or a stack of stolen records. People who were terrified brought notes. "I started tracking it after the spring report," she said, "because Dane asked me to merge several spreadsheets for the annual impact packet, and the names were wrong." "Wrong how?" "Duplicates. Women counted once for intake, once for a phone call, once for a grocery card, once for a referral we never confirmed. Sometimes the same woman appeared under 3 different service categories, and then each category got counted as a separate person helped." I opened my notebook. "Were these internal categories or external donor categories?" "Both, depending on the report. For donors, they used the largest possible number. For board summaries, Dane called it cumulative touch points, but in public materials, your mother says women, not touch points. Women." There it was. Fog turned into mechanics. Nina flipped a page. Her handwriting was small and tense. "The foundation claimed it supported about 1,200 women last year. I could verify 147 meaningful cases." "Define meaningful." Actual services beyond an intake form or one-time event contact. Emergency rent, hotel placement, legal aid, therapy, transportation tied to a service plan, something real. 147, I repeated. She nodded. And even that might be generous. A waitress came by. We both stopped talking until she poured coffee and walked away. Nina leaned closer. Some phone numbers are dead. Some addresses are shelters Harbor Light doesn't have agreements with. A few names belong to women who came to one resource fair and never enrolled. And the photo shoot participants. She stopped. I looked up. What about them? They were listed as long-term beneficiaries. My hand tightened around my pen. Nina's voice dropped. Not all of them, but enough. Your mother did a branding campaign 2 years ago. They brought in women from partner shelters, gave them makeup, clothes, gift cards, took portraits, had them sign general media releases. Later, some of those women became impact stories and donor packets. Housing, counseling, legal support, full journey language. Did they receive those services? Some got gift cards, one or two got referrals. I couldn't find leases or case notes for most. I thought of the portraits at the gala, the soft lighting, the way donors had looked at those women's faces and seen proof. Who approved the impact stories? I asked. Nina rubbed her forehead. Serafina approves final language. Iris records the videos and does interviews. Dane approves numbers. Calvin reviews anything that goes to major donors or regulators. My family, arranged like signatures at the bottom of a lie. Why come to me? I asked. She gave a sad little laugh. Because you were the only person in that meeting who asked if the women were real. That sentence landed harder than I expected. For 35 years, my family had made my questions sound like cruelty. Now, a shaking assistant in a diner was telling me those questions were the first decent thing anyone had done. Nina slid a folded paper across the table. These are categories I can document from memory and my own notes. I didn't print files, I didn't download anything. But I can show you where to look if someone with authority asks. I did not touch the paper immediately. Are you still able to access the systems? Yes. Then do not alter anything. Do not delete anything. Do not warn anyone. Keep a contemporaneous log of what you are asked to do, when, and by whom. Use dates, times, exact wording if you can. If Dane tells you to change records, write it down right after it happens. She nodded quickly. I already started. Good. That morning, I went home and built the archive that later became known as the Lantern Files. I chose the name because Harbor Light had used lantern imagery for years, turning light into a logo, a promise, a halo. I wanted a different kind of light, not the gold ballroom kind that made rich people look generous, but the hard white kind auditors use when they are searching for stains. The master folder sat on an encrypted drive. Inside it, I created subfolders with plain names. Beneficiary counts, vendor payments, donor restrictions, gala video, legal threats, survivor testimony, family communications. Then I created a document called Chain of Events and entered the timeline from the gala forward. Every message, every call, every threat, every unanswered question. I copied the anonymous emails with full headers. I saved screenshots of Iris's video before anyone could edit captions or delete comments. I downloaded the public gala live stream where my mother had framed me as a heartless daughter and the edited clip. Then I began with what was public. Bad organizations often assume public documents are too boring to be dangerous. I pulled Harbor Light's Form 990 filings for the past 5 years, annual reports, donor impact letters, gala programs, grant announcements, press kits, and expense summaries that had been shared with family around board events. I did not need secret files to see the first cracks. I only needed patience. The numbers did not simply differ, they told different stories depending on the audience. One donor letter claimed restricted emergency housing funds had supported hundreds of safe placements. A public annual report claimed over 1,200 women housed and supported. A grant report described integrated transitional care. The Form 9900 showed program service expenses that looked impressive at the top line, but became strangely vague underneath. Housing assistance was bundled with outreach, outreach with awareness, and awareness with media. That was not an accounting category. That was camouflage. At noon, Nina sent one more message. Look at Lighthouse Wellness Retreat Consulting. I found the vendor in an expense summary from the previous year. Lighthouse Wellness Retreat Consulting had received 3 payments totaling $380,000. The description read, Trauma-Informed Leadership Retreats and Survivor Resilience Programming. It sounded noble, expensive, but noble. There was no website listed on the report. The business address was a coastal property 3 hours away, a luxury vacation house with an infinity pool and a rental listing advertising executive restoration experiences. The owner of record, through a limited liability company, traced back to a man named Robert Vale. I knew that name. Robert Vale was my father's law partner. I sat very still. A foundation claiming to house abused and homeless women had paid $380,000 to a trauma retreat consultant tied to my father's closest professional ally. The address was not a shelter. It was not a counseling center. It was not a service provider with clinical staff and client files. It was a vacation property where people like my mother could stand on a balcony, drink mineral water, and call it strategy. I felt the floor drop because inflated beneficiary numbers were one kind of scandal. They could be explained away as sloppy language, weak controls, bad categorization, ambitious storytelling. My mother would have survived that. Iris would have cried through that. My father would have converted it into a governance improvement plan. But related party money was different. Restricted donor funds moving through vague vendors connected to family friends was not a misunderstanding. It was a system with doors, signatures, and beneficiaries who were not the women on the brochures. I opened the Lantern files and created a new document under vendor payments. Lighthouse Wellness Retreat Consulting, $380,000. Then I added the address, the payment dates, the public property records, the LLC connection, and Robert Vale's relationship to Calvin Monroe. I wrote everything as if someone hostile would read it later. No adjectives, no revenge language, no assumptions I could not support, just facts. At 4:06 p.m., Nina texted again. Are you seeing it? I looked at the vendor file, the donor letters, the public reports, and Maribel's printed face still sitting on my kitchen table. Yes, I wrote back. Then I added one more sentence to the chain of events. Nina thought the shelter numbers were the scandal. They were only the cover page. The first time I called Maribel Cruz, the number listed in Harbor Light's old intake summary belonged to a tire shop in Queens. A man answered over the sound of air compressors and said, Lady, nobody named Maribel works here. For 2 days, I searched public records, old social media posts, partner shelter newsletters, and every donor packet where Maribel's face appeared. Harbor Light had made her visible everywhere except in the one place that mattered, their actual service records. In my mother's world, Maribel was a symbol. In Dane's spreadsheets, she was a success metric. In Iris's speeches, she was proof that compassion worked. But in the files that should have shown rent payments, case notes, legal referrals, housing dates, and follow-up services, she was almost a ghost. Her portrait appeared on the cover of the Gala program. Her story appeared in the annual campaign. Her name was attached to a paragraph donors had probably read with open checkbooks. Maribel came to us after fleeing a dangerous home with nothing but a backpack and a prayer. Through Harbor Light's emergency housing program, she received 6 months of safe shelter, trauma counseling, legal advocacy, and job placement support. Today, she is rebuilding her life with dignity. It was beautiful. That was the problem. Beautiful lies travel farther than ugly truth. I finally found her through a comment under an old community center post. Someone had tagged a Maribel Cruz in a photo from a winter coat drive. The woman in the picture was older than the brochure image, her face fuller, her smile guarded but real. I sent a careful message from my professional account, identifying myself, explaining that I was reviewing public claims made by Harbor Light, and asking whether she would be willing to speak. She answered the next afternoon. I knew somebody would come asking one day. We met in a public library branch near her neighborhood. Maribel chose the place, and I was glad she did. She arrived 10 minutes early, carrying herself like a woman who had learned to scan exits before sitting down. Tess Monroe? She asked. Yes. Her eyes moved over my face. You look like her. I knew who she meant. I'm sorry. She sat across from me. Don't apologize for your face. That's not what she used. I opened my notebook, but did not write yet. You don't have to tell me anything you don't want to tell me. Maribel laughed once, quietly. People say that right before they ask. Then I'll ask plainly. Did Harbor Light provide you with 6 months of housing? No. The word came out flat. Not angry, not dramatic, just tired. Did they provide legal advocacy? No. Counseling? No. Job placement support? She looked toward the window. A volunteer told me about a resume workshop at another place. I didn't go. I was sleeping in my car then, and I was afraid to leave my things. I kept my face still, but something inside me changed shape. What did Harbor Light give you? I asked. Maribel counted on her fingers. Makeup for the photos. A blue dress I had to give back, $50 cash. A grocery card for $25. Coffee and muffins the morning of the shoot. That's it. I stopped writing. They paid you $50 for the photo shoot? Yes. They said it was a dignity campaign. Of course they did. My mother never exploited anyone when she could dignify them first. Did you sign a release? I signed something. They told me it meant they could use the pictures for fundraising. I asked if they were going to use my real name, and the young woman said, maybe first name only. Then my whole name was everywhere. Did anyone ask permission to write your story? No. Did they interview you? A little. Not like the brochure. They asked where I was from, if I had kids, what I hoped for. I said I wanted one night where I could lock a door and sleep. They turned that into me escaping a dangerous home with a backpack and a prayer. Her mouth tightened. I had left my cousin's apartment because her boyfriend kept coming into the bathroom when I showered. I had 2 trash bags, not a backpack. And I wasn't praying. I was angry. I looked down because I did not trust my face. Maribel leaned back. Your mother liked the prayer better. That sentence told me more about Serafina Monroe than any bank record ever could. When I showed Maribel the Gala program, she stared at her own printed face for a long time. Then she touched the caption with one finger. They said I had a home. Yes. I was sleeping behind the laundromat when this went to print. I had interviewed whistleblowers before. I knew how to stay calm because calm made records admissible. But sitting across from Maribel Cruz, watching her read the fictional version of her own survival, I felt something hotter than anger, shame. Not because I had created the lie, but because some part of me had still been treating Harbor Light as a family scandal. My humiliation, my mother's hypocrisy, my father's threats, my sister's performance, my professional instincts vindicated. Maribel made the room wider. This was about women who had been turned into props while money passed over their heads and into silk dresses, vendor contracts, legal retainers, and hotel ballrooms. "Can I keep this?" Maribel asked, holding up the program. "Yes." "Good. I want to show people what they did." "You don't have to go public to help." She looked at me sharply. "I know what I have to do. I'm asking what it costs." I respected her immediately for that. "It may cost privacy," I said. "They may try to discredit you, say you misunderstood, or claim you signed consent." "Did I consent to a fake life?" "No." "Then write that down." So I did. Over the next week, Maribel led me to two other women whose faces I recognized from Harbor Light materials. One was a mother named Tasha, listed in a donor packet as having received emergency legal aid after domestic violence. She told me she had filled out an intake form at a resource fair and never heard from a lawyer. "I called 3 times," Tasha said over video, her toddler climbing in and out of her lap. "The voicemail was full. Then a year later, my friend sent me a newsletter saying I had a safety plan and court support. I didn't even have bus fare to the courthouse." Another woman, Elise, appeared in a campaign video under the phrase "safely housed within 48 hours." In reality, she had spent 11 nights in her car with her teenage son while waiting for a callback. Harbor Light had eventually paid for 2 nights in a motel, then counted her case as a housing placement. "2 nights," Elise said. "I was grateful. Don't get me wrong, but 2 nights is not being housed. 2 nights is being told to check out by noon." The third woman would not let me use her name even in my private notes. She had once given a quote during intake: "I just want to stop being afraid." Harbor Light's brochure turned it into, "Harbor Light taught me I never have to be afraid again." When I read the fabricated quote aloud, she closed her eyes. "I still check the parking lot before I leave work," she said. So no, they did not teach me that. Every interview went into the Lantern files under survivor testimony. I used initials when requested, separated direct quotes from summaries, and marked what could be corroborated. My father would attack anything emotional as unreliable, so I built the file in a language even Calvin Monroe could not easily sneer at. Claim, evidence, contradiction, witness, supporting document. But privately, in a separate note only I could see, I wrote what I could not put in the formal file. My mother rented their pain. The phrase stayed with me. She had not invented suffering. That would almost have been simpler. The women were real. Their fear was real. Their unstable housing was real. Their court dates, car seats, unpaid phone bills, and motel receipts were real. But Harbor Light had taken those real fragments and arranged them into profitable fiction. My mother did not need to help a woman for 6 months if she could photograph her for 6 minutes and let donors imagine the rest. Then Iris went on television. It was a Tuesday morning, the kind of soft, bright segment where scandal gets laundered into inspiration. The host introduced my sister as a leading advocate for women rebuilding after trauma and asked how Harbor Light was handling recent online negativity. Iris lowered her eyes. My laptop sat open on my kitchen table while Nina texted me commentary that was half fear and half rage. On screen, Iris wore cream satin soft pink lipstick and pearl drop earrings that brushed her jaw every time she turned her head. She looked fragile in a way that made other people feel protective. "It has been heartbreaking," Iris said, "because the women we serve have already had to prove their pain to systems that failed them. And now, some people cannot stand seeing women being loved publicly." The host nodded with solemn sympathy. "Some people." She did not say my name. She did not need to. My family had learned long ago that implication was cleaner than accusation. Iris continued, Harbor Light has always been about radical belief. We believe women before paperwork. We believe healing before cynicism. We believe love is measurable in lives, not spreadsheets. I paused the video. The earrings flashed on the frozen screen. I had seen them before. Not on Iris. On an expense summary Nina had flagged 2 days earlier. The vendor was a boutique near the Lydian Grand. The category was outreach wardrobe and media presentation. The amount was high enough to catch my attention, but not high enough by itself to prove much. I zoomed in on the screenshot. Then I opened Iris's public social media. 3 weeks before the gala, she had posted a story from inside that boutique. The same pearl drops were displayed in a velvet case beside a caption, "Choosing softness today." Softness had cost the foundation $890. I kept digging. The earrings were not alone. There were dresses coded as survivor engagement attire, hair and makeup charged as media readiness, hotel suites described as donor relations space, first-class upgrades buried under travel for advocacy outreach, a stylist invoice categorized as trauma-informed presentation consulting. I sat with those phrases for a long time. Somewhere, Maribel had wanted one night behind a locked door. Somewhere, Tasha had needed bus fare to court. Somewhere, Elise and her son had checked out of a motel at noon. And Iris had gone on television wearing earrings purchased with foundation money while telling America that spreadsheets could not measure love. Actually, spreadsheets could measure quite a lot. They could measure a boutique receipt against a donor restriction, a hotel suite against a housing claim, and the distance between a woman sleeping in her car and a gala program saying she had been rescued. Nina texted before I could message her. "Please tell me you saw the earrings." I replied. "Already saved." "Good," she wrote. Dane told accounting last month that Iris's TV clothes count as program expenses because she embodies the mission. I leaned back and laughed once, not because it was funny, but because fraud often became absurd right before it became undeniable. She embodies the mission. No, she wore it. She modeled it. She monetized it. That night, Maribel's called me. I expected her to ask about the television segment because it had already started circulating online. Instead, she said, "I found the dress." "What dress?" "The blue one from the photo shoot. I thought they returned it to the store or something. But I saw a picture from another fundraiser. Your sister wore it." I closed my eyes. "Are you sure?" She's thinner than me, so they pinned it different. But it's the same dress, same sleeve, same little stain near the hem. I remember because I spilled coffee before the photographer came in, and the assistant got mad. My mother had taken a dress placed on Maribel for a dignity campaign and let Iris wear it to raise money from the story. There are moments when betrayal becomes so specific it becomes an object. A blue dress, a pearl earring, a grocery card, a motel checkout time, $50 in cash. Those objects became the spine of the Lantern files. Not because they were the largest amounts, they were not. The retreat consultant, the condo, the legal payments, the donor restrictions, all of those would matter more in court. But the small things showed the soul of it. They showed what my mother believed people were for. By the end of that week, I no longer cared about clearing my name as much as I cared about returning names to the women my mother had flattened into marketing copy. Maribel was not a success story. She was a woman who had been cold behind a laundromat while strangers applauded her imaginary rescue. Tasha was not an impact metric. She was a mother who had gone to court alone. Elise was not safely housed. She was 2 nights closer to nowhere, and my mother was not a saint. Saints do not need fake leases. Saints do not pay women $50 for their faces and then spend donor money dressing their daughters for television. Saints do not turn suffering into brand language and call the invoice compassion. For the first time since the gala, I understood the shape of my revenge. It would not be a public tantrum. It would not be a leaked rumor or a tearful counter video. My family knew how to win those battles. They had practiced emotion like theater and reputation like law. So I would not fight them with feelings. I would fight them with what they had always accused me of loving too much: documentation. My mother did not rescue women. She rented their pain and called it impact. The letter from my father arrived by courier at 8:40 on a Thursday morning. That was Calvin Monroe's style. Email was for ordinary threats. Certified mail was for people he wanted to make feel watched. But a courier meant theater. It meant he wanted me to open the door, sign my name, hold the envelope, and understand that my father had converted family disappointment into legal procedure. The envelope was thick, cream-colored, and addressed to me with the formal version of my name, Teresa Monroe. Nobody called me Teresa unless they wanted distance or control. I set it on my kitchen table beside the lantern files binder I had started printing in sections. Then I made coffee, because if my father was going to threaten me before breakfast, I was at least going to be properly caffeinated. The letter was 6 pages long. It accused me of defamation, unauthorized access to confidential information, interference with donor relationships, emotional harassment of staff members, and intentional infliction of reputational harm against the Harbor Light Initiative. It warned that any continued communication with current employees, beneficiaries, donors, vendors, board members, or media representatives could result in civil action. It suggested that my conduct demonstrated increasing instability and personal animus rooted in unresolved family grievances. That phrase made me laugh out loud. Unresolved family grievances. My father had always loved turning truth into a symptom. The last paragraph was the point. We urge you to cease all defamatory conduct immediately and pursue private family reconciliation before irreversible consequences follow. Private family reconciliation meant silence. Irreversible consequences meant exposure. I scanned the letter, saved the envelope, logged the delivery time, and filed everything under legal threats. Then my phone rang. Mom. I stared at the screen for a long moment before answering. Tess, my mother said, soft and wounded, as if she were calling from a hospital bed instead of the center of a scandal she had not yet admitted existed. Serafina. The silence sharpened. You're calling me by my first name now? I'm answering a legal threat from your attorney. It seemed appropriate. Your father is trying to protect this family. No, he's trying to protect evidence from becoming public. She exhaled. There, that voice, that awful, flat voice you use when you want to hurt people. I'm not trying to hurt anyone. You have always hated that Iris had a softer heart. I closed my eyes, not because the words wounded me, because I could hear how many times she had rehearsed them. My mother did not argue spontaneously. She arranged emotional weapons in advance. No, I said. I hated that you confused softness with performance. Her breath caught, but only for a second. You think compassion has to look like your spreadsheets. I think compassion should survive contact with a bank statement. Tess, you are not well. And there it is. I am your mother. You're the founder of a charity that used women's faces to raise money you didn't spend on them. Her voice changed. The softness disappeared. Be very careful. I am. No, you're angry. You're embarrassed because your sister showed people who you really are. She showed people an edited video. She showed people your spirit. My spirit asked for lease payments. My mother gave a small, bitter laugh. Do you hear yourself? Lease payments, always the same. You can't even talk about wounded women without reducing them to documents. The documents are where your promises were supposed to become real. For the first time, she had no immediate answer. Then she said, quietly, "If you keep going, you will lose more than this family." The line went dead. I sat with the phone in my hand, feeling the old reflex rise in me, the child reflex, the one that said, "Apologize before the silence gets worse. Fix it before dinner. Make yourself easier to love." I opened the lantern files instead. That afternoon, Iris posted a video. She was sitting on a white couch with no makeup except the kind of makeup designed to look like no makeup. Her hair was pulled back. A tissue rested in one hand. She did not say my name, but she did not need to. "I wasn't going to speak about this again," she began, voice trembling. "But when someone close to you attacks the work that survivors depend on, silence becomes complicity." The video had soft piano music underneath it. Of course it did. She talked about women being re-traumatized by demands for proof. She talked about coldness disguised as accountability. She said Harbor Light was not perfect because no human work was perfect, but that criticism should come from love, not bitterness. Then she cried, not hard, just enough. A single tear slipped down her cheek, and by the time I refreshed the page, thousands of strangers had decided I was a monster. Comments came fast. "Your sister sounds jealous." Imagine attacking abuse survivors for attention. Some people use auditing as an excuse to be cruel. "This is why women don't come forward." That one made me set the phone down. Because that was the lie my family had chosen. Not just that I was difficult, not just that I was jealous. They were making me into the kind of woman who harmed survivors by asking whether survivor money had reached survivors. It was clever, it was disgusting, and it worked. By Friday morning, one of my largest compliance clients emailed to say they needed to pause our current engagement until recent public concerns are resolved. The language was polite, but the meaning was simple. My family's smear campaign had reached my work. I read the email 3 times, then forwarded it to my attorney friend Leah with a subject line: "Employment impact from public statements." Leah called 5 minutes later. "Tess," she said, "please tell me you have counsel. I have you. I mean, someone with litigation bandwidth. I'm building evidence first. You're building evidence while your family builds a narrative. I know. No, I don't think you do. They're going to make you look unstable before you can make them look corrupt. They already started. Then stop taking calls from them." I looked at the saved recording log, the legal threat, the screenshots. "I need them to keep talking." Leah went quiet. "That is not a legal strategy. That is a trauma response wearing a blazer." I almost smiled. "I'll be careful." "No, you'll be documented. That's not the same thing." She was right, but by then, careful had started to feel like another word for alone. That evening, Nina messaged me from a number she had never used before. Dane told staff to clean up beneficiary inconsistencies before the internal review. I sat up. What internal review? Board Finance Committee. Monday. He said outdated records create confusion, and we need one source of truth. One source of truth. Fraud loved phrases like that. Did he give specific instructions? I typed, yes. Merge duplicates, remove incomplete intakes from active beneficiary list, delete old draft folders. He asked me to help accounting harmonize support categories. Do not delete anything, I wrote. Do not alter records. Can you preserve metadata without removing files? I think so. I can take screenshots of folder properties and version histories. I have access because I manage uploads. Do that only if it is within your normal access. Log the request, exact words, time, who was present. She sent a shaking hands emoji, then deleted it, then wrote, I'm scared. I know if they find out, then we get you counsel before they can isolate you. You keep saying we, because you are not doing this alone. For a long time, no reply came. Then, nobody at Harbor Light has ever said that to me. I saved the exchange under family communications. Though Nina was not family, maybe that was why she could tell the truth. On Monday morning, Dane began deleting. Not openly. Men like Dane rarely slam doors when they can quietly relabel them. Nina sent me updates from inside the office as the finance committee prepared to meet upstairs. 10:14 a.m. Dane asked IT to restrict access to old beneficiary exports. 10:26 a.m. Folder named 2023 Intake Raw moved to archive. 10:41 a.m. Draft grant backup no longer visible. 11:03 a.m. Dane said, if it wasn't verified, it shouldn't exist. That last sentence mattered. I told Nina to write it down immediately. She did. By noon, she had preserved enough metadata to show files existed before they vanished, who accessed them, and when permissions changed. She did not send me the files. She sent descriptions and timestamps from notes she was legally allowed to keep for her role. It was not perfect. It was not complete. But it was a map. And destruction has its own smell. That afternoon, I received a call from a number I did not recognize. Miss Monroe? A woman asked. Yes. My name is Miriam Shaw. I represent several major donors to the Harbor Light Initiative. I stood from my desk. Miriam Shaw was not family. She was not staff. She was not a social media commenter or a reporter looking for a quote. She was counsel for people with money. And in my world, that meant the room had changed. What can I do for you? I asked. I believe the better question is what your family has already done. I said nothing. She continued, my clients received donor impact reports that appear inconsistent with the restricted grant budgets and public filings. Your name has come up as someone who raised concerns before the recent controversy. Who gave you my name? A donor who attended the gala. She was disturbed less by your question than by the way your family answered it. I thought of 300 faces turned against me and felt for the first time the possibility that not every person in that room had believed the performance. Miriam's voice stayed measured. Do you have documentation? Yes. Are you willing to share it under appropriate legal protections? Yes. Are there vulnerable witnesses involved? Yes. Then we should meet carefully. Carefully. Not privately. Not emotionally. Carefully. The word felt like a handrail. We scheduled a meeting for the next day. Before hanging up, Miriam said, Miss Monroe, one more thing. If records are being altered or destroyed, document the timeline immediately. Spoliation can become extremely important. I already started. A pause. Then, with the first trace of warmth, she said, I suspected you had. After the call, I sat very still. My phone pressed against my palm. For days, my family had been shrinking the world around me, turning donors into enemies, colleagues into risks, strangers into judges. Miriam's call did not fix anything, but it opened a door. Then Maribel called. Her voice sounded rough. I saw your sister's video. I'm sorry. Stop saying sorry for things they do. I swallowed. She made it sound like asking questions hurts women, Maribel said. I know. No. Listen to me. They used my face. They made up my life. They said I had a home when I was sleeping in my car. Her voice cracked, but it did not break. Please don't let them keep using it. That was the moment I almost cried. Not at the gala, not reading my father's legal threat, not watching IRS turn thousands of people against me. It was Maribel, asking not for revenge, not for money, not even for justice in the grand cinematic sense. Just this: do not let them keep using me. I won't, I said. After we hung up, I added one more section to the lantern files. Record alteration timeline. The entries looked small on the page, but I knew what they meant. Dane was not cleaning up inconsistencies. He was burying them. My father was not protecting the family. He was warning a witness. My mother was not wounded by cruelty. She was frightened by exposure. Iris was not defending survivors. She was standing in front of the door while the files disappeared behind her. For the first time, I stopped thinking of silence as something they wanted from me. Silence was something they were creating. Deleted folders, edited videos, legal threats, crying posts, paused contracts, changed permissions, rewritten women, missing leases. My family had spent years calling me cold because I noticed numbers. Now the numbers were vanishing. I thought my family was trying to silence me. Then Dane started deleting files, and silence became evidence. Restricted money has a sound if you know how to listen for it. It is not dramatic. It does not announce itself with locked safes or offshore transfers. Most of the time, it whispers from one column to another, disguised in language so soft that even decent people read past it. Emergency housing becomes community stabilization. Legal aid becomes empowerment navigation. A donor's clear instruction becomes a suggestion buried under mission flexibility. That was where I started after Miriam Shaw came into the picture. We met in a conference room at her office on the 31st floor of a building where the windows were too clean and the coffee tasted expensive. Miriam was in her 50s with gray hair cut to her jaw and a calmness that did not feel performative. She did not waste time comforting me, which I appreciated. Comfort had become suspicious in my family's hands. She sat across from me with a yellow legal pad and said, "Show me the restricted funds first. Not the video, not Iris's social media, not my father's threat letter, not even Maribel's testimony. Restricted funds." That told me she understood. I opened the lantern files and began with the donor letters. One major gift agreement had pledged $500,000 for emergency housing placements for women leaving unsafe situations. The language was not vague. Funds were to be used for rent, short-term hotel stays, deposits, utilities, and direct housing stabilization costs. The grant report later sent to that donor claimed the money had supported hundreds of safe housing interventions. I placed the expense summary beside it. Luxury hotel events, media consultants, Iris's television wardrobe, Calvin Monroe's legal retainers, office renovations, a resilience strategy retreat tied to Robert Vale's vacation property, a leased city condo labeled as an emergency housing unit. Miriam looked at the documents for a long time, then she said, "Do you have lease records for actual placements?" "Some. Not enough to match the claims." "How many?" "Based on public records and what Nina can verify from internal access, fewer than 30 short-term placements with actual housing payments. Maybe fewer than 25 if we exclude duplicates and one-night hotel stays." And they reported hundreds. Yes. She wrote one word on her pad. Exposure. I watched her underline it twice. The next stage of the investigation was not glamorous. It was hours of matching dates, payment descriptions, donor restrictions, board minutes, vendor names, credit card categories, reimbursement memos, and public claims. It was the kind of work my family had always mocked because it did not photograph well. But the truth was sitting in the boring places. The donor money had not disappeared. That was almost the worst part. Disappeared money creates a blank space. This money had moved very visibly if you knew which labels to distrust. A $42,000 hotel invoice had been coded as emergency outreach convening. The event photos showed white orchids, champagne, branded candles, and Iris posing in front of a step and repeat. A $17,600 invoice from a media consultant had been charged to Survivor Narrative Development. The consultant's deliverables were not counseling materials or safety resources. They were talking points, donor-facing story arcs, and voice refinement for Iris's morning show appearances. A $9,850 wardrobe expense had been split into 3 smaller charges and coded under advocacy presentation support. A $73,000 renovation of Harbor Light's executive suite had been described as trauma-informed administrative redesign. I found photos from the contractor's portfolio showing a custom marble refreshment bar, velvet chairs, and a private restroom with heated floors. Women were sleeping in cars while my mother warmed her feet on donor money. Then there was the condo. Nina found it by accident. She had been reviewing a folder named Transitional Housing Partnerships when she saw monthly payments to Harbor View Residences. The description said emergency housing unit lease. At first, it looked legitimate. Harbor Light claimed to use scattered site apartments for women who needed confidential placement. But the address was familiar. I had sent Iris flowers there the year she and Dane moved in. At the time, my mother said the apartment was a temporary place while they stabilized after wedding expenses. I remembered thinking that was strange because Iris's wedding had cost more than most people's homes, and nothing about her life had ever suggested instability. The lease was paid by Harbor Light. The utilities were paid by Harbor Light. A furniture invoice for the unit had been coded as client dignity setup. I pulled Iris's Instagram photos from that same apartment. The velvet green sofa in the furniture invoice appeared behind her in a post about self-care. The brass lamp, listed as trauma-informed residential furnishing, cast beside Dane in a birthday photo. A balcony view from the emergency housing unit matched a video where Iris had toasted new beginnings with champagne. When I showed Miriam, her expression did not change, but her pen stopped moving. "Private inurement," she said. I nodded. "At minimum." "For both Iris and Dane?" "Yes." "Possibly approved by Serafina, hidden by Dane, and legally structured by Calvin or someone in his office." "Can you prove Calvin knew?" "Not yet." "Then don't say it yet." That became Miriam's rule for me. Do not say what you cannot prove yet. Not because it was untrue, but because truth spoken too early can be attacked as speculation. She taught me to separate knowledge from evidence, instinct from admissibility, outrage from presentation. I hated how much sense that made, because I knew my father. I knew his fingerprints even when I could not see them. The vendor agreements were too carefully worded. The conflict disclosures were too vague in exactly the way an attorney would design them. Board minutes contained phrases like mission-aligned discretion and reputational preservation. Those were not Dane's phrases. Dane wrote like a man trying to sound taller than he was. My father wrote like a door locking from the inside. Still, I did not add Calvin's name to a claim until the documents could hold it. Nina continued feeding us timelines, not files. She noted when folders changed, when staff were told to reclassify services, when Dane asked accounting to harmonize grant narratives with financial reality. That phrase deserved a museum. Financial reality had to be harmonized because the moral fantasy was out of tune. The vendor network widened. There was a wellness consultant whose business license traced to one of Serafina's closest friends from the country club. She had received $126,000 for trauma-centered donor engagement experiences. There was an outreach strategist whose registered address matched a mailbox store, and whose only visible work product was a 6-page memo about expanding compassion language across impact verticals. There was a temporary housing coordinator who had no rental portfolio, no property management background, and a family connection to a board member. Harbor Light had paid him $214,000 across 18 months. Every vendor sounded like a prayer until we looked behind the invoice. I built a spreadsheet with columns for vendor name, amount, service description, restricted fund source, related party indicators, deliverables, and discrepancies. Then I added a final column, actual benefit to survivors. Most rows stayed blank. That blankness became its own accusation. Meanwhile, the board minutes gave us something even stranger than financial misconduct. They gave us culture. At one meeting, a board member had asked whether the beneficiary counts distinguished between one-time contact and long-term housing support. My mother responded, according to the minutes, that overemphasis on technical distinctions risks re-traumatizing the mission, not re-traumatizing women, re-traumatizing the mission. I read that sentence 5 times. The mission had become a person in my mother's mind, a fragile, sacred person who could be harmed by questions. Actual women could be misquoted, photographed, underpaid, ignored, and counted 3 times, but the mission had to be protected from discomfort. At another meeting, Dane reported significant progress in housing access, but no board member requested a list of lease payments. When a treasurer asked for more detailed restricted fund tracking, Calvin, attending as legal counsel, advised that excessive detail in minutes could create unhelpful litigation pathways. There he was, not approving fraud directly, not yet, but shaping darkness around it. I added the minutes to the lantern files under board complicity. Miriam reviewed them with a donor group 2 days later. I was not in the first half of that meeting. She wanted to prepare them before bringing in the daughter of the founder, which was both wise and irritating. When she finally called me into the room, 6 people sat around the table with expressions I recognized from the gala, only stripped of champagne and moral glow. One donor, a man named Elliot Pierce, looked down at the housing grant agreement in front of him and said, "My wife and I gave that money for rent." "Yes," I said. "Not events. No. Not television clothes. No. Not your sister's apartment." I held his gaze. "No." He leaned back like the air had been pushed out of him. "We put my mother's name on that gift." I did not know what to say to that. There are moments when sorry is too small and explanations are obscene. Miriam stepped in. "The question now is recovery, preservation, and referral." A woman at the end of the table, whose foundation had funded legal services, asked, "Are we looking at charity fraud?" "Potentially," Miriam said. "Misuse of restricted funds, false donor reports, false regulatory filings, private benefit, private inurement, breach of fiduciary duty, and possible tax-exempt status issues." The words landed one by one, heavy and clean. For the first time, the scandal had a legal skeleton. Not family drama, not jealousy, not a cold daughter who did not understand compassion. Charity fraud, misuse of restricted funds, false filings, private inurement. Those phrases did not care if Iris cried. After the meeting, Miriam walked me to the elevator. "You understand," she said. "Once this goes to authorities, you cannot control the outcome." "I never controlled it. You may lose your family permanently." I smiled a little. "Miriam, I think I'm documenting the fact that I already did." Her face softened, but only briefly. "Then, make the presentation clean." "What presentation?" "The one you will eventually need. Board, donors, authorities, maybe press. Not a rant, not a family accusation. a clean audit, claim, support, impact, remedy. That night, I went home and rebuilt the Lantern files into a presentation structure. Reported beneficiaries versus verified beneficiaries. Restricted funds versus actual spending. Vendor payments and related party concerns. Emergency housing claims versus lease documentation. Foundation-funded condo. Executive and family expenses. Fabricated impact stories. Altered record timeline. Witnesses and survivor testimony. Potential legal exposure. Recommended immediate controls. I worked until sunrise. Every slide had to earn its place. Every claim needed a document. Every emotional moment needed corroboration. Maribel's testimony was powerful, but I paired it with the brochure, the lack of housing records, the payment notation for the photo shoot, and the original campaign invoice. The condo slide included lease payments, furniture invoices, utility records, and Iris's public posts. The wardrobe slide tied purchases to expense codes and media appearances. I did not write my mother is a liar. I wrote, public claim, unsupported by available service documentation. I did not write, Iris stole from survivors. I wrote, foundation funds appear to support personal wardrobe and residential expenses for executive family members. I did not write my father threatened me because he knew. I wrote, legal correspondence attempted to restrict contact with witnesses and donors after compliance concerns were raised. The cleaner the language became, the more devastating the evidence looked. At 5:42 in the morning, I reached the slide on restricted emergency housing funds. I stared at the comparison table until the numbers blurred. Donor-restricted housing funds received $1.8 million. Verified direct housing support, a fraction of that. Unverified or non-housing expenditures, the rest. The rest had become ballrooms, consultants, retainers, dresses, renovations, and a beautiful apartment with a balcony where my sister drank champagne under the caption, New Beginnings. I thought of Maribel sleeping behind the laundromat. I thought of Elise checking out of the motel at noon. I thought of Tasha going to court alone. Then I thought of my mother at the gala, hand to heart, telling 300 people that I saw numbers while Iris saw people. For the first time, I understood that she had been accidentally honest. I did see numbers. I saw the number of women reported and the number actually housed. I saw the number on the boutique receipt and the number on the grocery card. I saw the number of nights claimed in a donor story and the number of nights a woman slept in her car. I saw how many dollars had passed through Harbor Light's hands and how few had landed where the brochures promised. Numbers were not the opposite of people. Numbers were how people disappeared when nobody checked them. At sunrise, I saved the presentation under a new file name, Lantern Files, Preliminary Audit Disclosure. Then I wrote the final sentence for the restricted funds section. The money did not disappear. It moved into silk dresses, hotel suites, and my sister's apartment. 3 days after Miriam told me to build a clean presentation, Harbor Light announced the Trust Restoration Gala. That was the official name. Not an audit meeting, not an emergency board session, not a donor reconciliation forum, a gala. My mother's response to possible charity fraud was another ballroom. The invitation arrived in my inbox at 9:03 a.m., embossed digitally with the Harbor Light lantern and a line of gold script, restoring faith, renewing hope, reclaiming the mission. Beneath that was a photograph of my mother standing in soft focus beside Iris, both of them looking solemn and brave as if they had survived an attack rather than engineered one. I read the email twice, then forwarded it to Miriam with no comment. She called 8 minutes later. "Please tell me this is not real," she said. "It is very real." They are holding a gala to address allegations of misused gala funds? They would call that poetic. They would call that discoverable. For the first time in days, I almost laughed. The event was scheduled for the following Friday at the Lydian Grand again. Same hotel, same ballroom, same donors, press, orchids, and moral lighting. The stated purpose was to combat misinformation and reaffirm Harbor Light's sacred commitment to women in crisis. Sacred commitment. That phrase was everywhere now. My mother had shifted from defending the foundation to sanctifying it. That was her pattern. If a fact became dangerous, she covered it in holiness and dared people to touch it. 2 hours after the invitation went public, I received a separate email from Iris. Tess, Mom wants you there. We all do. This family needs healing. The women need unity. Please don't let bitterness be the final word. No apology for the edited video. No acknowledgement of the smear campaign. Just unity, which in my family meant my silence plus their forgiveness. I did not answer. At noon, Dane emailed me too. Hi, Tess. In light of the ongoing confusion, it would be helpful if you attended Friday's event and allowed Serafina to address concerns constructively. There may be an opportunity for you to clarify your comments from the prior gala. Clarify. That was not an invitation. It was staging. They wanted me in the room because my absence could be framed as cowardice, but my presence could be converted into submission. They would call me up gently or publicly and pressure me to apologize for hurting the mission. My mother would forgive me under lights. Iris would cry. Donors would exhale. Reporters would write that the Monroe family had begun to heal, and the files would stay buried. I forwarded Dane's email to Miriam. She replied with 4 words. They are building a trap. I typed back, I know. Then let us build a better one. Our strategy meeting took place that evening in Miriam's office after business hours. Present were Miriam, me, Nina on a secure video call with her camera off, Maribel sitting beside me with the Gala program in her purse, and an outside nonprofit litigation attorney named Grant Holloway who spoke only when necessary and wrote everything down like a man preparing for war with punctuation. Miriam began. This is not a press stunt. This is a controlled disclosure. We are not ambushing for spectacle. We are preserving evidence, notifying responsible parties, and preventing further misuse of funds. Maribel crossed her arms. If there are cameras there, it is spectacle whether we want it or not. You're right, Miriam said. So we control what matters. Documents first, claims tied to evidence. No exaggeration, no personal insults. Maribel glanced at me. Can I insult them a little? Not at the microphone. Fine. Nina's voice came through the speaker, small but steady. Dane told staff today the gala is meant to restore donor confidence before outside agitators poison relationships. Outside agitators, I repeated. I think he means you. He always did enjoy making me sound more exciting than I am. Nobody laughed, but the room loosened for half a second. Then Nina said, he also told accounting to prepare a simplified impact sheet. He said not to include historical methodology because it invites confusion. Grant looked up. Did he say that in writing? Slack message. I saved a screenshot within the system and wrote the time in my log. Good, Grant said. Do not remove anything. Do not forward internal files to personal accounts. Keep your log. I know, Nina whispered. I'm trying. Her voice cracked on the last word, and the room went still. For all my anger, I sometimes forgot what this cost her. I had lost clients and family illusions. Nina could lose her job, health insurance, references, and the ability to pay rent in a city that punished honesty faster than fraud. I mean it, I said. You will have legal support. She was quiet. Miriam leaned towards the speaker. My clients are prepared to fund counsel for whistleblower protection if needed. You are not alone in this. A breath came through the call, shaky and relieved. Okay, Nina said. Okay. Then Maribel took the Gala program out of her purse and laid it on the table. Her own face stared up at us. I'll speak, she said. I turned to her. You don't have to. I know. Everybody keeps telling me that like it is kindness. She tapped the brochure. They already put me in public. They put a fake version of me in public. I want the real me to show up. Miriam studied her carefully. They may claim you signed a release. I signed for photos, not fiction. They may try to make your personal history part of the argument. Maribel's jaw tightened. My history is already in their argument. They just changed it to make rich people feel clean. No one had an answer to that. We planned for 3 possible paths. First, donor council would submit the evidence package to state charity regulators and appropriate federal contacts before the gala. So my family could not claim the disclosure was only a theatrical accusation. Second, Miriam would notify a block of major donors and enough board members to force emergency governance action. Third, if my mother used the gala to publicly pressure me, I would respond with a prepared, documented presentation and invite Maribel to speak, only if she still chose to in the moment. I did not love that last part. It felt too close to using her again. Maribel seemed to read my face. Do not make my choice about your guilt. I just don't want you becoming a prop in my revenge. Then remember, I am a person, and hand me the microphone when I ask for it. That settled it. 2 days later, my father requested a meeting. The message came through his assistant, which was absurd because he was still my father. But Calvin Monroe never performed power halfway. We met at a private club near the courthouse, in a room with leather chairs, dead-eyed portraits, and the kind of silence that made money sound old. He stood when I entered. Tess. Calvin. Pain crossed his face, or a performance of pain. With my father, the difference had always been difficult to audit. I had hoped we could speak as family, he said. Then why did your assistant schedule it? He ignored that. Your mother is devastated. Which mother? The founder, the defendant, or the woman who edited a video to make me look like I attacked abuse survivors? His mouth tightened. You are making serious allegations without understanding the consequences. I understand them. No, you understand rules. You do not understand destruction. I sat across from him. That is an interesting distinction from a man who sends threat letters to his daughter. The letter was necessary because you are exposing the foundation to harm. The foundation exposed itself. Tess. His voice softened, which meant the blade was coming. You have built a life around being right because you never believed you could be loved. For a second, I felt the hit exactly where he aimed it. Then I thought of Maribel's face on the program. Is this the family portion of the meeting? I asked. Or the legal intimidation portion? He leaned back. If you embarrass your mother on Friday, I will make sure no one in this industry touches you again. There it was, clean, direct, almost refreshing. I had checked state law before coming. Recording consent rules mattered, and I was not going to hand my father an easy counterattack. Because recording was not legally safe enough in that setting, I did not record him. Instead, after I left the club, I sat in my car and wrote a contemporaneous memo with the time, location, exact wording to the best of my memory, who was present, and what he had threatened. Then I emailed it to myself and Miriam. Her reply came quickly. Keep everything. He is making our argument for us. Still, that night was the closest I came to backing down. Not because I doubted the evidence. The evidence was stronger every day, not because I feared my father's threat, though I did. A ruined reputation in compliance is not an inconvenience. It is professional death by whisper. What shook me was a photograph. I found it while looking for an old email from my mother. It was attached to a message she had sent me years earlier after a donor brunch. In the photo, she was holding me as a toddler at one of Harbor Light's earliest events. Her hair was darker then, her face less polished. I was asleep against her shoulder, one hand tangled in her necklace. She was not looking at the camera, she was looking at me. For one foolish moment, I let myself believe that woman had been real. Maybe she had been. Maybe there had been a version of Serafina Monroe who started with one honest sandwich and one frightened woman outside a bus station. Maybe corruption did not enter all at once. Maybe applause arrived first as encouragement, then became oxygen, then became hunger. Maybe my mother had loved me in some private room before the world taught her that Iris photographed better. I sat on my bedroom floor with the laptop open and cried for the mother in the photograph. Then I opened Maribel's file. The intake note said, "Client requested immediate safe sleeping option. Reports sleeping in vehicle and public spaces. High vulnerability." The donor brochure published 3 weeks later said, Maribel found 6 months of safe shelter through Harbor Light's emergency housing program. There was no lease, no hotel invoice, no case plan, no counseling referral, no legal support, only the photograph, the quote, the fiction, and $50. I closed the old picture of my mother holding me. Whatever she had been, whatever I wish she had remained, she had built a machine that turned women's desperation into applause. And now, she was building another stage to protect it. On Friday afternoon, I dressed carefully. Not for beauty, not for intimidation, for credibility. Navy suit, low heels, hair pinned back. No jewelry, except small silver studs my grandmother had given me before my mother learned to turn inheritance into leverage. Before leaving, I checked the disclosure timeline. Evidence package submitted to donor council, regulatory referral delivered, selected board members notified, whistleblower council on standby for Nina, Maribel's statement printed, sealed, and hers to use or tear up, presentation saved in 3 locations. Miriam texted as I stepped into the elevator. Remember, calm is not cold, calm is control. At the Lydian Grand, the same gold light spilled across the lobby. The same floral smell followed me toward the ballroom, but this time, I did not feel like I was walking into my mother's world. I felt like I was walking into a crime scene with better lighting. Near the ballroom entrance, Iris saw me and froze. Then she smiled with visible effort and opened her arms. "You came," she whispered. "You invited me." Her hug was brief and brittle. "Please don't make tonight harder than it has to be." I was about to say the same thing. Behind her, my mother stood surrounded by donors, dressed in white, one hand resting over her heart. When she saw me, relief spread across her face so beautifully that several people turned to look. She believed my presence meant surrender. My father stood near the stage, watching me like a closing door. Miriam arrived 5 minutes later with 3 donors and Grant Holloway beside her. Nina was already inside, pale and rigid near the audiovisual table. Maribel entered last, wearing a simple black dress and carrying the Gala program with her face on it. My mother did not see her at first. That would change. As the ballroom filled, I looked up at the screens on either side of the stage. They glowed with Harbor Light's lantern logo, waiting for whatever story someone chose to project. My mother built a stage to prove she was innocent. I let her. Stages have screens. The second Harbor Light Gala smelled exactly like the first one. White orchids, champagne, polished wood, expensive perfume. The faint, metallic bite of camera equipment heating under ballroom lights. It was strange what the body remembered. I had walked into that same room weeks earlier as a daughter, trying not to become a problem. Now, I walked in as a witness, an auditor, and maybe the last person my mother should have invited onto a stage. The ballroom was beautiful in the way lies often are when enough money is spent on them. Gold light washed over the tables. Each centerpiece held a small glass lantern with a battery candle inside. Behind the podium, two enormous screens displayed the Harbor Light logo, brighter than the faces beneath it. Donors whispered before I reached my table. Some looked away, some stared openly. A few gave me careful nods, the kind people give when they are afraid of being seen choosing a side too early. Reporters stood near the back wall, pretending not to watch every movement. Board members clustered in tight groups, speaking through smiles that did not reach their eyes. Iris sat at the front table in a gray dress, looking breakable. She had mastered a new posture since the first gala. Shoulders slightly curved, chin lowered, hands folded like she was enduring persecution gracefully. Dane sat beside her, pale and restless, checking his phone every few seconds. My mother entered last. Of course she did. Seraphina Monroe wore white again. Not cream, not silver, white. Her hair was swept back. Her pearls glowed at her throat, and when she moved through the room, people parted as if virtue needed an aisle. She kissed cheeks, she held hands, she whispered comfort to donors who had given her money and now needed reassurance that their generosity had not been foolish. Every gesture said, "I am wounded, but I am still holy." Then she saw Maribel. For half a second, my mother's face went still. It was so quick most people missed it. But I had spent my life studying the tiny fractures in Seraphina Monroe's expressions: recognition, calculation, alarm. Then warmth returned like a curtain dropping. She turned away. Miriam leaned toward me and said, "Remember the order. Let her create the record." So I waited. The program began with a video because my family had apparently learned nothing except how to double down. Soft piano music filled the ballroom. Images of women's hands, shelter beds, city streets, and sunrise over the harbor faded across the screens. Iris's voice narrated over the footage. At Harbor Light, we do not ask women to be perfect before they are protected. We do not demand that pain arrive with paperwork. We believe first. We love first. At my table, Maribel's jaw tightened. Nina stood near the audiovisual booth with a tablet in her hand, her face blank with terror. I wanted to look at her longer, to reassure her, but even eye contact felt dangerous. So I kept my eyes on the stage and let my stillness do what it had always done: get mistaken for coldness. When the video ended, the applause was cautious, not thunderous like before. Cautious. My mother noticed. Her smile widened. She stepped to the microphone and placed one hand over her heart. "Friends," she began. "Family. Partners in hope. These past weeks have tested us." Her voice trembled just enough. "We have faced misinformation. We have faced bitterness. We have faced the painful reality that even sacred work can be misunderstood by those who stand close to it, but never truly enter its heart." Several people turned toward me. I did not move. My mother continued, "But Harbor Light has never belonged to one family. It belongs to every woman who has walked through fear and found a door open. It belongs to every donor who chose compassion over cynicism. It belongs to every survivor who refused to let paperwork define her worth." More applause, still cautious but warmer. Then Iris rose and joined her at the podium. She did not speak immediately. She let the silence prepare itself for tears. I have been heartbroken, Iris said. Not for myself, but for the women who have watched their healing questioned. For the staff who have worked tirelessly while being treated like criminals. For my mother, who built this mission with nothing but faith. Dane looked down at his hands. Iris turned slightly toward my side of the room. Tonight, we want to choose family. We want to choose unity. And we want to invite my sister, Tess, to help us begin that healing. There it was. The trap opened in velvet. A murmur moved across the room. Cameras shifted. My mother stepped away from the microphone and looked at me with a face so tender it was almost convincing. "Tess," she said, "come stand with us." For a moment, I heard my father's voice from childhood. Facts have timing. This was timing. I stood. Every conversation in the room thinned into silence as I walked toward the stage. My heels sounded too loud on the polished floor. My father watched from the side, expression tight. Miriam stood too, not following me, just making herself visible. Grant moved toward the aisle. Two major donors turned their chairs fully toward the podium. I climbed the steps. Iris reached for my hand. I did not take it. My mother smiled through that failure and spoke into the microphone. "My daughter has been under tremendous strain. We love her. Harbor Light loves her. And I know she has words in her heart tonight." She expected apology language, something soft, something usable, something that could be clipped and posted by morning. I adjusted the microphone. "You said I only see numbers," I said. "Tonight, I brought the women behind them." The room changed before the screens did. My mother's smile froze. Iris blinked. My father took one step forward. Behind me, the first slide appeared. Reported beneficiaries versus verified services. No music, no portraits, no gold lantern, just a clean table with sources listed at the bottom. I turned toward the audience. Harbor Light publicly reported serving or housing approximately 1,200 women last year. Based on available documentation, witness accounts, and internal records preserved before recent file restrictions, fewer than 150 meaningful service cases can currently be verified. Actual direct housing payments appear to support fewer than 30 short-term placements. A ripple moved through the ballroom. My mother reached for the microphone. "Tess, this is not the appropriate—" I looked at Miriam. Miriam stood. "Mrs. Monroe, Donor Council has already submitted a preliminary evidence package to the appropriate authorities and notified the Board of Preservation obligations. I recommend you allow Ms. Monroe to complete her statement." The words "appropriate authorities" did what no moral appeal could have done. They made the room stop breathing. I advanced the slide. Restricted housing funds versus actual spending. I explained the $500,000 gift restricted for emergency rent, deposits, utilities, and hotel placements. I showed the donor report claiming hundreds of safe housing interventions. Then I showed expense categories charged against housing-related funds: hotel events, media strategy, wardrobe, executive renovations, legal retainers, and consulting payments. A donor at table 4 whispered, "That's my grant." My mother said, "These categories are complex." "They are," I said. "That is why the underlying documents matter." The next slide appeared. Lighthouse Wellness Retreat Consulting, $380,000. The vacation property photo filled half the screen. The LLC connection appeared beside it. Robert Vale's name sat in plain text under related party concern. My father's face went gray with fury. "This is defamatory," he said. "No conclusion is being presented beyond the documented payment, address, ownership connection, and relationship to Foundation Counsel." I replied. "The recommendation is independent review." Grant Holloway's mouth twitched like he almost approved. Then came the condo. The slide showed lease payments to Harbor View residences, utility payments, furniture invoices coded as client dignity setup, and public social media images from Iris and Dane's apartment. Same sofa, same lamp, same balcony. Someone gasped loudly enough that Iris flinched. "That was temporary," she said. "We were between places." I looked at her. "It was coded as an emergency housing unit?" Dane wiped his forehead. The next slide showed wardrobe expenses, pearl earrings, television dress, hair and makeup, stylist invoices, expense codes like survivor engagement attire and trauma-informed presentation consulting. Iris whispered, "You are humiliating me." I almost laughed, but I did not. "No, I am identifying charges." My mother tried to recover. Iris was representing the women. Public advocacy requires presentation. Maribel stood. She did not ask permission. She simply rose from her chair with the Gala program in her hand. My mother saw her then, truly saw her. "Maribel," she said, voice syrupy with sudden recognition, "how wonderful that you're here." Maribel walked to the aisle. "You know my name now?" The room went silent again. But this silence was different. It did not belong to my mother. Maribel came to the front and looked at me. I stepped back from the microphone. She held up the program. Her face looked out from the cover, younger, polished, edited into hope. "They put my face on this brochure," she said, "and said I had a home. I was sleeping in my car when that brochure went to print." No one moved. She continued, voice steady. "They gave me makeup. They put me in a dress. They paid me $50 and gave me a grocery card. They did not give me 6 months of housing. They did not give me a lawyer. They did not give me counseling. They gave donors a story about me that I did not live." A woman near the front began to cry, but Maribel did not soften for her. "I am not here because Tess told me to come," she said. "I am here because you already used me in public. I wanted to meet the people who bought the lie." That broke something in the room, not loudly, no shouting, just a shift, like furniture moving inside people's minds. Donors stopped looking at me as the problem and started looking at the stage, at my mother, at Iris, at the screens. Nina moved next. She stepped away from the audiovisual table, shaking so hard I could see it from the podium. "I work for Harbor Light," she said. "Dane Whitaker instructed staff to clean up beneficiary inconsistencies before an internal review. He told us to merge duplicates, remove incomplete intakes, and harmonize support categories." Dane stood so quickly his chair scraped backward. "That is not what I meant." Nina looked at him. "You said if it wasn't verified, it shouldn't exist." "I meant inaccurate records should not be used. You restricted access after Tess started asking questions." "I was protecting client confidentiality." "You deleted draft folders." "I archived outdated material." Miriam's voice cut through the room. "Mr. Whitaker, preservation notices were delivered earlier today." Dane looked at Iris. Iris looked away. Then he made the mistake weak people make when the structure above them begins to crack. He tried to climb over someone else. "Serafina approved the reporting strategy," he said. My mother turned her head slowly. The whole ballroom seemed to understand at the same time that Dane had just stopped being family and started becoming a witness. Iris grabbed his arm. "Dane!" He pulled away. "No, Iris. I am not taking all of this. Your mother knew the numbers were broad. Calvin reviewed the donor language. You knew wardrobe was being coded to outreach. I didn't know it was wrong." I advanced the next slide. Email. Iris Monroe to Dane Whitaker. The subject line read, "Media Expenses." Iris's own words appeared on the screen. Can we code the cream suit and earrings under survivor outreach media? Mom says donors respond better when I look soft but serious. Iris stared at the screen as if betrayal had somehow come from the projector. I was asking, she said. That doesn't mean I understood accounting. You understood. The receipt was not personal enough to pay yourself, I said. My father moved toward the podium. This presentation ends now. Miriam stepped into the aisle. No, Mr. Monroe. The board has already received the preliminary package. A majority has voted to suspend executive authority pending independent investigation. My mother's lips parted. For the first time in my life, I saw Serafina Monroe with no prepared expression. Miriam continued, Major donors are seeking immediate accounting of restricted funds. Evidence has been referred to charity regulators. Additional materials concerning intimidation of witnesses and potential record alteration are preserved. Calvin looked around the room, searching for the old power. It was not there. Not fully. Some people still feared him, but now they feared being associated with him too. That is a different kind of fear. My mother turned back to me, her face folded into grief. You would destroy your own mother for strangers? The question was almost perfect. It had everything she loved. Motherhood, betrayal, public injury, strangers presented as less worthy than blood. For 35 years, that question would have found the softest part of me and lived there. Not anymore. I looked at Maribel, then at Nina, then at the donor whose mother's memorial gift had gone into orchids and strategy retreats, then back at Serafina Monroe. No, I said. I'm protecting the strangers you used to look like a mother. The room did not explode. Real consequences rarely arrive like movies. There was no instant arrest, no dramatic confession, no security guards dragging my mother away while donors cheered. What happened was quieter and worse for her. People stopped believing the performance. Board members stood and gathered near Miriam. Donors demanded copies of the evidence packet. Reporters pushed toward the aisle, calling questions that my father could no longer control with a glance. Dane sat down hard, his face empty. Iris cried, but nobody moved toward her fast enough. My mother remained at the podium in her white dress, one hand still near her heart, as if she could not understand why the gesture had stopped working. Then someone began clapping. It was not for me. At first, I thought the sound came from the back. Then I saw it was Tasha, one of the women from the brochure interviews, standing near the side doors. Elise stood beside her. They must have come with Maribel and not told me. They were clapping for her, for Maribel, for the woman who had stood under my mother's lights and taken back her own face. The applause spread, uneven and emotional. Not the polished donor applause from the first gala. Not the obedient standing ovation my mother was used to. This applause cracked. It shook. It belonged to people waking up angry. Maribel lowered the program to her side. I stepped away from the microphone because this part was not mine. My mother looked smaller than she had ever looked, but not because I had shrunk her. The truth had simply restored scale. Without the halo, she was just a woman in a white dress standing beside a screen full of receipts. The applause did not come for me. It came for Maribel. That was how I knew the room had finally changed. The first account freeze happened 48 hours after the second gala. I learned about it from Miriam, who called before sunrise and said, the emergency motion was granted. After the ballroom, after Maribel's testimony, after Dane's panic and my mother's white dress, and the applause that did not belong to me, the world had felt suspended. Everyone had seen the receipts, everyone had heard the women, but exposure is not the same as consequence. My family had survived embarrassment before. This was different. Harbor Light's operating accounts were frozen pending investigation. Donor-restricted funds could not be moved without oversight. Credit cards were suspended, vendor payments were halted. Every staff member received a preservation notice written in language even Dane could not soften. Do not delete, do not alter, do not destroy. For once, silence was not theirs to create. By Monday, the board announced that Serafina Monroe had been placed on administrative leave from all executive duties. Iris Monroe was suspended from public advocacy and donor relations. Dane Whitaker was removed as CFO pending forensic review. Calvin Monroe resigned as foundation counsel in a letter that called his departure a step taken to protect the mission from distraction. My father could make even retreat sound noble. The statement was carefully written. It did not say fraud. It did not say theft. It did not say women had been turned into marketing material. It said independent investigation, governance concerns, and temporary leadership transition. But everybody knew what it meant. The halo had cracked in public. The same media outlets that had once filmed my mother walking through shelter halls now stood outside Harbor Light's offices with microphones and headlines. The morning show that had let Iris cry about coldness disguised as accountability aired a segment titled Questions Mount Over Harbor Light Spending. They showed her old interview beside images from the Gala presentation. The condo sofa, the vendor chart, Maribel holding the brochure with her own face on it. I watched only once. Not because I felt sorry for Iris. I did not. Not then. But because there was something sickening about seeing the press reverse itself with such clean confidence, as if they had not helped build the myth they were now dismantling. Reporters called me for comment. I declined every request through Miriam. That surprised some people. They expected revenge to want cameras. They expected me to step into the space my mother had vacated and claim the moral lighting for myself. I wanted none of it. The truth did not need me to pose beside it. Donor lawsuits came next. Elliot Pierce and 3 other major donors filed claims for misuse of restricted funds, fraudulent inducement, and breach of fiduciary duty. A family foundation that had funded legal aid demanded a complete accounting and repayment of unsupported expenditures. Another donor group requested court supervision over remaining charitable assets to ensure money would not be moved, hidden, or reclassified under some new phrase my mother could make sound holy. The complaints were brutal because they were specific. A memorial housing grant charged against event design. A survivor legal services fund used to pay public relations consultants. Emergency stabilization money routed through vendors with personal connections. Program funds supporting the apartment where Iris filmed self-care videos. My mother had always understood the power of stories. Now the donors told theirs in numbered paragraphs. Dane cooperated faster than anyone expected. Weak men often become useful when the room stops rewarding loyalty. Within a week, he had provided emails, approval chains, payment notes, and internal spreadsheets to investigators through his own counsel. According to Miriam, he was trying to reduce his exposure by presenting himself as pressured, overruled, and emotionally manipulated by the Monroe family. I nearly laughed when she told me. "Is he wrong?" she asked. "No," I said. That's the irritating part. Dane had not invented my mother's hunger for applause. He had not taught Iris to turn softness into currency. He had not trained my father to threaten people in perfect sentences. But he had signed the reports. He had coded the condo. He had ordered staff to clean up inconsistencies. He had known enough to panic when Nina started writing things down. Being weak did not make him innocent. It only made him available to stronger corruption. Iris lost 3 speaking engagements in one day. A women's leadership conference removed her from its keynote slot. A lifestyle brand quietly deleted a sponsored post featuring her. The morning show issued a vague statement about reviewing guest claims more carefully in the future, which meant nothing and protected everyone. Online, strangers who had called me jealous now called Iris a fraud. Some apologized to me, most simply switched sides with the same enthusiasm they had used to condemn me. I did not answer them either. Public opinion was not justice. It was weather. My father's fall was quieter but more dangerous. The donor complaints included his legal threat letter to me. Miriam also submitted my contemporaneous memo from the private club meeting, along with board minutes showing his advice about limiting detail to avoid unhelpful litigation pathways. Nina's log included references to staff being told all outside questions should be routed through Calvin's office. A bar complaint was filed. When I read the confirmation, I expected triumph. Instead, I felt hollow. Calvin Monroe had taught me how to fear language. He taught me that a calm voice could be a locked room, that advice could be a threat wearing a tie, that reputation mattered more than repair. Seeing his own words turned into evidence should have felt like poetry. It felt like grief with paperwork. 2 weeks after the gala, my mother came to my apartment. She did not call first. She never had. Boundaries to Serafina Monroe were something other people created when they wanted to be cruel. I opened the door because part of me still needed to see what she looked like without a stage. She stood in the hallway wearing sunglasses, though the building lights were dim. Her face looked thinner. Her hair, usually perfect, had loosened around her temples. For 1 second, she looked like the woman in the old photograph holding me as a child. Then she said, "Are you going to invite me in? Or do you only humiliate me in public now?" The illusion died quickly. I stepped aside but did not offer tea, coffee, or comfort. She entered my living room and looked around as if poverty might be contagious. My apartment was not poor. It simply did not announce itself. "You always liked small rooms," she said. "I liked rooms where I could hear myself think." She turned toward me. "You destroyed your sister." I showed her emails. "You destroyed your father's career." He threatened witnesses and protected false reporting. "You destroyed my life's work." "No," I said. "I found out what your life's work had become." Her mouth trembled, and for a moment I thought she might finally say it. "I misused the money. I lied about Maribel. I let applause matter more than women. I hurt you." Instead, she whispered, "I did everything for the family name." There it was, the final refuge, not the women, not the mission, not even God, who had appeared in so many of her speeches that I half expected him to be listed as an unpaid consultant. The family name. I looked at her, this woman who had let donors worship her, while her own daughter learned to become useful instead of loved. "You did it for applause," I said. "The family name was just the microphone." She slapped me. It was not hard enough to knock me down. It was not even the first time she had used pain to end a conversation, though the other times had usually been emotional. But the sound of it in my quiet apartment was shocking. Her eyes widened as if I had made her do it. "Tess?" "No." I touched my cheek once, then I opened the door. "You need to leave. I am your mother, and I am done pretending that means you get unlimited access to me." The mask broke then, not into remorse, into rage. "You think these women love you? You think these donors respect you? You are useful to them right now because you hurt me. When they are finished, you will be alone with your little files and your cold little heart." Years earlier, those words would have lived inside me for months. That day, they arrived and found no room. "Maybe," I said, "but I will be alone with the truth." She stared at me, breathing hard. Then she walked out. I closed the door and locked it. Only after her footsteps disappeared down the hall did I sit on the floor and cry. Not because I regretted it, because losing a mother is not one event. It is 1,000 tiny funerals for every version of her you tried to save. I cried for the woman in the old photograph. I cried for the child asleep against her shoulder. I cried for all the years I had believed excellence could earn tenderness. I cried because the world had loved a mother who had never existed for me. And now, even that imaginary mother was gone. Miriam called later that evening, but I let it go to voicemail. Nina texted to say she had been placed on paid administrative leave with whistleblower counsel involved. Maribel sent only 3 words. "You okay, Tess?" I stared at the message a long time. Then I wrote back, "Not yet, but safe." It was the most honest thing I could say. In the weeks that followed, Harbor Light signs stayed on the building, but the organization underneath them changed beyond recognition. Interim leadership took over, investigators interviewed staff, vendors received subpoenas, donors demanded restitution plans. Former beneficiaries came forward with stories that sounded too much like Maribel's to dismiss as misunderstanding. My mother retreated into statements through counsel. Iris stopped posting. Dane kept cooperating. My father's office removed his profile from its website while the bar complaint moved forward. People asked me whether revenge felt satisfying. Sometimes it did. I will not lie and pretend I was above that. When I saw Iris's keynote canceled, a part of me remembered the edited Gala video and felt a sharp, clean pleasure. When I heard Dane had to explain the condo under oath, I slept better than I had in weeks. When my father's threat letter became evidence instead of power, something in my chest unclenched. But satisfaction was not healing. Revenge could expose the wound. It could name the knife. It could even take the knife away. It could not make a mother love honestly. It could not give Maribel back the night she slept in her car while her face raised money for a home she never received. It could not rewind Tasha's court date or Elise's motel checkout. It could not turn fake stories into real services after the fact. The foundation accounts were frozen. The board had shifted. My family's authority was suspended. The halo was off. But the women my mother used still needed help. That was the part the headlines could not hold for long. Scandal burns hot, then moves on. Rent does not. Fear does not. Legal hearings do not. Children still need beds after the cameras leave. One morning, Miriam called and said, "The donors want to discuss where recovered funds should go." I looked at the stack of lantern files on my desk. For months, I had followed the money backward through lies. Now, for the first time, there was a chance to follow it forward. My mother lost her foundation, but the women she used still needed one. The first meeting about the new fund was held in a room with no chandeliers. That mattered to me more than I expected. No orchids, no string quartet, no champagne cooling under gold light, no portraits printed large enough for donors to admire from a safe distance. Just a plain conference room at Miriam Shaw's office with a long table, bad coffee, legal pads, and a stack of documents that represented what was left after the performance burned down. Recovered funds, frozen funds, donor claims, restricted balances, emergency distributions, oversight proposals. Money finally stripped of music. Miriam sat at the head of the table, not because she wanted power, but because someone had to keep everyone from turning justice into branding again. Elliot Pierce was there with 2 other donors, Grant Holloway joined by video. Nina sat beside me with a folder in front of her, still pale from stress but no longer shrinking into corners. Maribel arrived last, carrying a notebook and wearing a red sweater that made her look nothing like the woman on the Harbor Light brochure. That felt important too. She sat down and looked around. So, this is where rich people decide what happens to poor women? Elliot winced. Miriam did not. Historically, yes. Today, we are trying something else. Good, Maribel said, because I have notes. She opened her notebook, and for the next hour, nobody interrupted her. That was the beginning of the Real Harbor Fund, though the name came later, and only after Maribel rejected 6 donor-friendly options that sounded, in her words, like perfume for guilt. The structure was simple because Maribel insisted it had to be. Emergency money should move quickly. A woman who needed a motel room that night should not have to become a paragraph first. Direct aid would be direct. Rent deposits, hotel stays, utilities, transportation, childcare during court appointments, phone replacement, lock changes, medication, food, and document fees. No woman's story could be used publicly without specific informed consent, renewed for each use. No photograph could be attached to services. No donor would receive a trauma narrative in exchange for a check. If they need tears to give, Maribel said, they can keep their money. The room went quiet after that. Then Elliot nodded. Fair. Nina became the compliance coordinator for the new fund. At first, she tried to refuse. I'm not qualified, she said after the meeting, standing near the elevator with her folder hugged to her chest. I looked at her. You documented record destruction while your boss was lying to the board. That was panic. That was integrity under panic. It counts. She gave me a tired smile. You sound like a motivational poster for whistleblowers. You should see my drafts. The truth was, Nina understood the danger of systems built around charismatic people. She knew how small tasks became large lies. She knew what happened when staff were trained to protect the mood of powerful leaders instead of the mission. That made her more qualified than anyone with a polished nonprofit resume and no scars. Her new job came with health insurance, legal protection, and a board that was required to listen when she said something did not add up. The first time she reviewed a direct aid request and approved an emergency motel stay within 2 hours, she called me crying. I just kept thinking, she said. This is what should have happened before. Yes. That's it? Just yes? That's all I have. She laughed through tears. You really are bad at comfort. I'm excellent at invoices. Honestly, that helps. Maribel became an advisor, though advisor was too small a word for what she did. She read every proposed policy, with the suspicion of a woman who knew how institutions hid cruelty in polite language. When a draft consent form said beneficiaries may be invited to share their journey, she crossed out journey and wrote story, if they want to, in their own words, for a specific purpose, with the right to say no without losing help. When a donor suggested an annual impact luncheon, Maribel stared at him until he added, or maybe a written report. Try again, she said. He tried again. The final reporting model used numbers first. How much money came in? How much went out? How quickly aid was delivered? What categories of support were funded? How many requests were denied and why? What gaps remained? If a survivor chose to share a story, she controlled her name, image, wording, and timing. She could withdraw permission later. She could be paid for her time. She could say no and still receive help. It sounded obvious once we wrote it down. That was what made Harbor Light's betrayal feel even uglier. Decency had not been complicated. It had simply been less profitable than performance. As for me, people kept asking whether I would become the new public face. Donors asked it. Reporters asked it. Even Miriam asked carefully once, though I could tell she already knew my answer. No, I said. You could help restore trust. I will help restore controls. That is possibly the least glamorous sentence ever spoken. Good. I did not want a podium. I did not want a portrait. I did not want my pain softened into a redemption arc for people who needed the story to feel complete. My mother had lived inside applause until she could not tell the difference between being admired and being good. I had no desire to test whether I was immune to the same disease. So I became what I had always been, only no longer apologizing for it. I audited. I reviewed controls, restricted fund tracking, approval thresholds, conflict disclosures, vendor documentation, board minutes, service verification, consent procedures, and reporting language. I built boring systems that made beautiful lies harder to tell. I asked irritating questions early before they could become subpoenas. I trained staff to treat documentation not as distrust, but as protection. Receipts, I told them, are not the opposite of compassion. Receipts are how compassion proves it arrived. Some understood immediately. Some took longer. That was all right. I had patience for honest confusion. What I no longer had patience for was fog. My family did not attend the first public update meeting for the Real Harbor Fund. Serafina remained under investigation and spoke only through counsel. Iris sold the city condo quietly after the lease issue became impossible to spin. Dane continued cooperating with investigators and, according to Miriam, had discovered a sudden passion for transparency. My father's bar complaint moved slowly, as legal consequences often do, but his name no longer opened doors the way it had before. Sometimes I missed them. That is the part revenge stories do not always admit. I missed a family that had not really existed. I missed the mother I had almost had in that old photograph. I missed the idea of a father whose intelligence protected people instead of cornering them. I missed a sister who might have loved me if love had not been made into a competition before either of us understood the rules. Missing them did not mean I wanted them back. Grief is not an invitation. Months later, Maribel called me from outside a courthouse. Her voice was breathless. "They approved the lock change in the deposit," she said. "For who?" "A woman with 2 kids. She didn't want her name in anything. She just wanted to know if the money was real." And it was real. I closed my eyes. For a moment, I saw the Lydian Grand Ballroom again. The white orchids, the screens, my mother in white. Maribel holding up the brochure with her own face on it. I heard the applause shifting away from performance and toward truth. Then the image faded, replaced by something smaller and better. A woman somewhere getting a lock changed. A child sleeping behind a door that held money doing what the story said it would do. That was not dramatic enough for a gala. That was why it mattered. Revenge did not heal everything. It did not return the stolen years or clean every wound. It did not make my mother honest, my father safe, or my sister kind. But truth created room. In that room, repair could begin, not the polished kind that fits into speeches, but the practical kind that pays a deposit before sunset. My mother said I had no heart because I followed the money. She was wrong. I followed the money because the women with broken hearts deserved more than a brochure.